Release That Witch. Audiobook, Part 92.
Chapter 1275, The Pharmaceutical Industry in Neverwinter. In Neverwinter, Grey Castle. 2 days later, Wendy sent the test results of the 2 new witches to Roland's office. "I have to say that their abilities are very complicated," Wendy said as she handed in the reports. "It was my first time seeing that there are so many variables in one ability. This is just a part of the test result. If you want to have the full report, you probably need to wait for another few days." Roland said as he put down his work and reviewed the report with great interest. "I believe that the tequila witches are also interested in them, right?" Wendy replied with a nod. They asked Phyllis to conduct the test for the chosen one immediately. Unfortunately, the light beams of the 2 new witches are quite weak. They definitely aren't the keys to the instrument of divine retribution. Roland was profoundly relieved after hearing this news. He had just approved the nationwide electricity plan, and all the magic cores were currently being converted into Mystery Moon's power. Had the chosen one suddenly appeared at this moment, Celine would have been pretty resentful. It would take a few decades to restore the instrument of divine retribution, and it would definitely not be a pleasant experience monitoring the device every day. Roland had heard from Honey that the senior witches from Tequila had recently developed a new hobby of sunbath. Instead of lying sprawled across the field under the sunlight, they actually crept out of the cave at night and lay there until the sunrise. Since direct sunlight could cause harm to the carriers, they generally did not like coming out of their hidings. Roland did not understand why the Tequila witches suddenly started this new activity, but at least, he could tell that they felt quite relaxed. This was undoubtedly a good sign. Roland quickly turned to the last page of the report. Thylane's ability mainly affected a person's mood, and it would only take effect after that person took the pill. Like most attaching magic type, her ability would lose its effectiveness after a certain period of time, and its lasting power normally depended on the size of the object and how much magic Thylane invested in the first place. The test results showed that the magic pill could alter literally every emotion that a man could feel, including but not limited to happiness, pain, fatigue, tiredness, anxiety, and fear. Once the power of the pill faded away, those suppressed emotions would come out altogether. Roland somehow figured out why the magic pill could do so many things, but the light beam was weak. The magic power, in a sense, was a nerve block that delayed the nerve conduction and the transmission of hormones temporarily. Its mechanism was very similar to that of some drugs in the modern society, except that the latter had very serious side effects and could be addictive as well. Nevertheless, the light beam was not the only factor that determined the value of one's ability. Thylane's magic pill would definitely create a lucrative market and bring Roland immense wealth that could shock the entire pharmaceutical industry if he sold the drug in his previous world. Mental illness was usually far more complicated than physical injuries, and it was normally harder to cure. Thylane's magic pill could not eliminate symptoms but could delay them. As long as he took control on individual dose, the pill could minimize the impact of many diseases. Patients, for example, would feel less tired and anxious, and thereby live a normal life. All the negative emotions could get out when the patient was fast asleep. In that way, he would be able to absorb negative emotions without even realizing it. Once people felt well rested and calm, their bodies would repair themselves a lot faster. The magic power could also help with some fatal injuries. People tended to lose their consciousness when experiencing excruciating pain. A lot of times, the injured was not able to properly handle their injuries in a timely fashion and thereby missed the best time to receive treatment. If they could treat themselves immediately before the paramedics arrived, they would have a higher chance to survive. The paramedics would then just need to deal with the shock and pain coming after and help the patient overcome the very first few days after the injuries, which were usually the hardest and most crucial. Also, there were other witches who could help with injuries. Roland remembered that Tilly had once told him about a witch named Della on the sleeping island who could alleviate pain. Hero from the Witch Union could transfer diseases to other living beings. Although he was not sure whether Hero could also transfer negative emotions, he could ask her to give it a shot. The key was that without Thylane's magic pill, neither Della nor Hero could be of much help. Soldiers could get injured anytime during a battle, and witches could not always come to their rescue. In fact, many First Army soldiers killed in action had died on their way to the hospital because they had lost their consciousness and failed to give their wounds an emergency treatment. Now, this situation might be changed. Wendy's report stated that Thylane's ability could either positively or negatively influence a person's emotions in general, but she could not choose what specific emotion she would like to apply her ability to. This was also what a new witch needed to learn. She had to understand and learn how to accurately control her ability. Roland trusted that Wendy and Agatha would teach her. Once Thylane learned how to apply her ability to a certain emotion, all the current problems would be solved. Roland could already see a prospective pharmaceutical industry from the report. This giant industry would definitely be more economically profitable than chaos drinks. As for the other witch, Roland ran his fingers through the form in the appendix on the last page and lapsed into thought. Your Majesty, this is. Nightingale apparently also saw the sections of the form in various colors. She looked up at Wendy and said, "Are you sure the report is accurate?" "Most of it is accurate. I can't really collect a large sample in such a short time," Wendy replied. "The only thing I'm certain now is that the number could decrease and increase." In short, the strange number Momo saw was the remaining years a person had at the current stage. The color of the number represented its future trend. Wendy recorded the numbers for the residents in Neverwinter that she and Momo had observed in great detail in her report and found that the color of the numbers for Neverwinter residents was significantly lighter than the refugees in the temporary residential area. She thus concluded that the color of the number was subject to change under the influence of different factors, including hunger, health, and disabilities. The deeper the color was, the lower the number would be. She also provided an example in the report that the number for a refugee from the Kingdom of Wolfheart had increased from 5 to 7 after he had drunk the cleansing water. If Momo's prediction was accurate, then this refugee must have carried some infectious disease, for at first, he would have only lived for another 5 years. However, after he drank the cleansing water, the situation had changed, and Momo reassessed his condition. Although Wendy did not know what the color represented for at present, she viewed it as an unhealthy condition. "Your Majesty," Nightingale said apprehensively. "It's better than what we thought, isn't it?" Roland comforted. "At least, the number could go up, as long as we use the right method." Wendy wanted to say something, but in the end, she remained silent. Roland thus returned to the report. It appeared that there was a huge difference in the numbers between various parts of Neverwinter. The average number in the North Slope mine area was the lowest among all, and that for refugees was a little higher. The numbers in the Witch Building and the Sleeping Spell were 10 to 20 higher than the other areas, which reflected that the awakened witches did live longer than ordinary people on average. Chapter 1276, An Overlooked Ability. Roland took out a piece of paper from his desk and roughly estimated the average age of the residents in the urban area and the temporary residential area. He then concluded that the average age of Neverwinter residents were between 40 and 50, while that of the latter was around 35. He could already tell many problems from these numbers. Generally speaking, it took a long time to increase men's lifespan. Apparently, the life in Border Town in the beginning should be no better than the refugees. However, in just 5 years, the lifespan of the local residents had increased significantly, to which Nana and Lily made a great contribution. "We've collected data of 1,000 people within just 2 days. I don't think Momo looked at each individual one by one, did she?" Roland asked. "No. If she has sufficient power, she can see the numbers of all the people in that area," Wendy replied quietly. "But she hasn't done that before, neither does she know her limit. She thinks that her ability is like a curse. She can see when they're going to die but can't do anything about it. Like she's watching people around her die," Nightingale commented after a sigh. Roland, however, thought it totally wrong. This was definitely not a curse or a misfortune. When the development of a country reached a certain level, every single policy could exert a profound influence on the nation. Roland certainly had to abandon that outdated management style, and that was the reason statistics was so important. Every modern organization should develop a well-functioning system to collect, observe, and track the data change and make adjustments to their policies accordingly. A statistical analysis of the residents' average lifespan was an indispensable step in this process. It would normally take several decades to found such a well-organized department and recruit enough employees to conduct the survey without Momo's ability, for people would never know how long a man could live after he was deceased. Currently, except for Neverwinter, the other cities in Grey Castle only had a secondary city hall to execute orders, and they were always short-staffed. It was, therefore, almost impossible for them to conduct the census in the communities. In fact, the establishment of such a complete information system was largely attributed to Scroll's hard work. Only when they could delegate literate people to grassroots organizations such as local communities could they say that a fully developed government had been established. Momo's ability, however, could help Roland skip all the preparation work and develop a national statistical system right away from scratch, even though she only knew a little about her ability at the moment. Once Wendy figured out what those different colors indicated, possibly hunger, disease, environment, etc., he could then easily build a huge database that predicted the future trend of the population. With proper management, Roland believed that the kingdom would benefit a lot from Momo's ability. Those nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart never knew what they had missed. Roland had already viewed Momo as an honorary clerk of the administrative office, and she could possibly become a minister in the future. By the way, did you get Nana's treating schedule? Roland asked as he closed the report. Wendy answered with a nod, she's working today. Do you want to see her? The hospital was indeed the busiest place in the city, especially after a major war. Unlike Anna, Nana Pine did not have to stay in the laboratory all day, but she was fully booked every day. It was said that there were hundreds of people on the wait list, and that number was steadily increasing. Her busy schedule was also partially due to her ability. Nana would exhaust her power within only 15 minutes when she treated a person with a broken limb. As such, she would not treat anyone that had lost a body part larger than a palm now. All these people would be granted a certificate of disability. Only after Nana came of age or upgraded could these disabled men jump the queue and receive treatment. They would need to show their certificates of disability to enjoy this privilege, of course. Speaking of upgrade, Nana would enter her adulthood in the months of demons this year. However, the first thing that came to Roland's head was when Nana had held that injured chicken and indignantly accused him of inflicting pain on the poor creature. Roland remembered that she used to study in the same school as Anna. All right. Let's go take a look. Momo had not expected that Wendy would treat her with great hospitality instead of banishing her after knowing about her ability. She and Thylane thus moved to the Witch Building and became members of the Witch Union. Every night after dinner, there would be some other witches visiting them, although Thylane and Momo could not match the faces to their names. The food here was heavenly delicious, and someone also taught them how to use the facilities in the room and told them what they should pay attention to in the castle district. Within just 2 days, they had changed their previous idea about the world completely. It was so nice to be alive. When Momo learned that she could see again, she threw herself into Wendy's arms and cried. This was the only place where she had the liberty to cry. Don't worry, Wendy consoled her while patting Momo on the back. Nana rarely lives in the Witch Building, but she's also a member of the Witch Union. She's around the same age as you and would love to treat you. On the day of her appointment, Momo followed Ring to the hospital early in the morning. On her way, Ring explained to Momo Nana's background. Unlike her, Miss Pine was from a noble family. She had great power and was called Miss Angel by Neverwinter residents. In other words, she was a person Momo looked up to. Momo could even see Nana in her mind's eye that the latter must be a smiling and elegant lady wearing pretty clothes whom everyone adored. Momo was thus very nervous when Ring led her to Nana's room. She lowered her head, feeling somehow ashamed and embarrassed. Is this the patient I'm treating next? A silvery voice reached her ears. Yes, she's Momo. Like you, she's also a witch, a familiar voice responded. Momo looked up and, surprisingly, found the person was none other than the king. And then she saw Miss Angel that everyone was talking about. It took Momo all her efforts not to scream. Nana Pine was wearing a white robe, with only a pair of eyes left in the air. Her clothes were far from being pretty. Instead, she wore even simpler than civilians. What truly horrified her was the fresh, dripping blood on her chest. Chapter 1277, Out of Darkness. Ah, don't worry. This isn't my blood, Nana said as she took off the robe with Ring's help. The previous patient broke an arm when operating the machine, so it's a little messy. Really? That's right. Come here. Let me take a look at your eye. She's so confident and strong. Is she really of the same age as me? Momo swallowed hard. She took off her eye mask carefully and slowly approached Nana. Right. Just like Wendy said. I should have sufficient magic power to cure you, Nana mumbled after a preliminary examination and handed Momo a bowl of liquid medicine. Then she patted the bed next to her and said, lie down after you drink it. It'll only take about 10 minutes. Momo heeded Nana's words, and, to her astonishment, saw the latter take out a knife. Your Majesty. Wendy. Momo said while looking at the two spectators helplessly. She was almost going to cry. Well, Nana, Wendy said. Can't you take things slow and give our new sister a bit time to get used to it? But this is the normal procedure, Nana refuted in surprise. If I don't cut the old wound open and remove it, my magic won't work. That's true, but you can first have a small chat with her. Well, in that case, how about talking about my previous patient? I feel it easier to cut a limb with a saw than an axe. No, not this. Correct, Roland rejoined. A saw can ensure a clean cut, but I don't think it's going to be easy to cut a big bone, like a thigh bone, with a saw, right? Neither for a skull. Those female nurses are no stronger than me by any means. If Anna could help me, that would make my life a lot easier. My fault. But it's simple. I can design an electronic one for you later. How does that sound? I assure you that you can break a bone within a second. Your Majesty, please stop. Ahem, sorry, I can't help when it comes to technical issues. Their voice gradually drifted off. Momo turned away and, dimly, saw Nana talking to the king and Wendy while gesturing with the knife in her hand from time to time, as though she was going to do an experiment on her. Cut? Saw? Axe? Her eyelids became increasingly heavy as sleep crept over her. Sorry, Vilain, I probably wouldn't be able to see you again after this treatment. Ah, she's asleep now, Roland said after he noticed that Momo had closed her eyes and fallen asleep. Nana raised her scalpel and nodded at the two. Now, I'll start. Nana thus made a cut into the socket, removed the old wound and cleaned up the skin around it. Soon, blood oozed out and soaked the gauze. During the whole process, her arm remained stationary except for her fingers and wrist. She had to complete this initial step manually. Her nimble operation was the sole result of a long-term training and practice. Amazing. Wendy muttered under her breath. I have to be fast, Nana said while twitching her lips. When I was in the field, I only had half a minute for each individual patient. If I couldn't give them an emergency treatment as fast as possible, I might not be able to save other patients. That's why she's become so swift, Roland thought to himself. You'd pass out at the sight of blood in the past, and those chickens, Your Majesty. Nana exclaimed in agitation while rolling her eyes. Don't ever mention it. You were the culprit. All right, Roland conceded while waving his hand. Plus. Nana paused for a second and said, I like the way I am now. At least, I'm much stronger, right? For a split second, Roland seemed to see the little girl he used to know again. Roland stroked Nana's head involuntarily and said, "Of course." Several minutes later, Momo's eye was cured. The sleeping fern will lose its effect in 2 hours. Such little amount won't cause harm to a witch, so she'll be okay once she wakes up, Nana said while looking toward Wendy. "Thank you," Wendy said smilingly with a nod. "By the way, how much magic power do you still have?" Roland asked casually. "Could you take a look at me?" Wendy's expression immediately changed, and Nana grasped Roland's arm in a sort of trenchant manner. "Are you hurt?" "No. I just feel that my nose is running lately." "Then you should go seek Lily," Nana said gruffly as she withdrew her hand. I took a look. "There's nothing wrong with you." "That's what I thought," Roland said while averting his eyes as Wendy cast him a suspicious glance. It appeared that Nana was not omnipotent. Roland was not sure if she could cure those underlying illnesses, as these invisible diseases were not, technically, injuries. Anyway, he had to do some research later. When Momo slowly opened her eyes, a slope of orangey-red clouds slid into her view. The clouds soaked in golden rays gradually faded to purple and drifted off in the distance. She could hear the rustling of the grass in the breezes, and occasionally, a few leaves rose into the air and brushed past her cheek. Everything was so peaceful and sweet. "I'm still alive," Momo thought. But Momo soon noticed something unusual. Her vision seemed to have expanded, and the distant scene had become clearer. She raised her head and found Eileen look into her eyes smilingly. The latter said, "You finally woke up." It was not until then that Momo realized that she was sleeping on her friend's legs, and they were currently right in front of the witch building. "How long did I sleep? Where's Wendy?" "She brought you to me and then left," Eileen said while shrugging. "You slept for the whole afternoon, although Wendy said you'd wake up in 2 hours. She told me that it was normal even if you didn't wake up in time. It's a sign of recovery. You'll feel better after waking up. How are you feeling? Can you see with your new eye?" Momo sat up and studied the surroundings curiously. She had thought that half of her world would be submerged in the darkness forever after her eye had been removed. She had never expected to see the world in its entirety again. "Eileen, what should I do?" Momo muttered. "What's the matter? How are we going to repay them for their kindness?" Eileen was stunned for a second before she burst into a laugh. She looked up at the sky and said, "I don't know either, but Wendy told me to work hard. This is how we can repay them. By the way, Wendy already told me what I should do in the future when you were asleep. I'll work with Nana Pine, who just helped you, and provide medical services to Grey Castle." At these words, Eileen scratched her nose and said in embarrassment, "Although I still don't know how I can help treat patients. But my ability," Momo said while clenching her fist. "Wendy mentioned you as well." Momo looked up and burst out in surprise, "Really?" "Yes," Eileen confirmed while nodding. "It's His Majesty's idea. He wants you to work in the administrative office with Miss Scroll and help with the operation of the kingdom." "Huh?" Momo could not believe her ears. "Can I?" "You need to ask yourself," Eileen said in amusement and pushed her at the back. "I haven't even figured out how I'm supposed to work here, but I think as long as we keep studying, we'll know one day." "I'm not as confident as you," Momo muttered in a hushed tone. "Do you think we can live here forever, like living in our home?" In fact, I also asked Wendy the same question. "Yes?" It took Eileen a while to reply this time. She said, "Of course we can, because it's already our home." Chapter 1278, A Historical Moment. A week later, Roland received 2 pieces of good news. One was that Iron Axe had repelled the demons with the napalm and thereby held the demons back temporarily. The commander-in-chief described the explosion of this new weapon in his letter in great detail. The blast was even more spectacular than the test. In fact, human beings had already used fire to repulse the demons back in the first Battle of Divine Will, where they had set the forest on fire at the rear. The massive wildfire raged for several days and dispersed the red mist in the sky, which, in the end, helped human beings gain a small victory. The demons thus learned their lesson and destroyed the forests, meadows, and even farms to avoid future disruptions of the red mist. They also built small stone towers similar to outposts in the area covered in the red mist just in case. With sufficient red mist on the campsite, they could then keep fighting even when the rear was ablaze. Without a doubt, Iron Axe and the general staff were inspired by the previous battle and developed this plan. The strength of napalm was its portability. It could burn in the thin air, and it was extremely hard to extinguish with water. Roland had not expected, however, that the fire would result in such a magnificent explosion in the whole city. Roland wished that Summer could reconstruct the scene. If he could find out the reason why the explosion had occurred, he could possibly exterminate the demons using the napalm. However, the Tusk City should have already been enveloped by the red mist again by now. It was almost impossible to get into the city for a second time. Also, Roland's heart ached at the fact that he had consumed more than 500 barrels of napalm all at once. It was not hard to produce fuels, as he would simply need to invest more manpower. However, the key to produce napalm was to mix the slimes of the rubber worms with animal blood, and only the Ministry of Agriculture could farm rubber worms. Nevertheless, the refugees from this battle were most important to Roland. Roland heaped praises on Iron Axe in his letter and also sent another 100 barrels of napalm to the front. The second piece of news was that the plant assembling the Fire of Heaven had finally assembled the first biplane. Roland immediately visited the plant in person after receiving the news from Anna. This brand new plant was built at the same time as the Aerial Academy. Compared to the steam engine plant built with slabs and bricks 2 to 3 years ago, this plant was designed for technologically demanding products. The steel frame provided the plant with a spacious area, which enabled workers to assemble and repair a dozen planes at a time. The plant was equipped with adequate illumination devices. The floor was tiled with polished slabs, and the whole plant looked phenomenal. Even Tilly was impressed with it when she entered the plant. Laymen might view it as a palace. Roland also invested the best equipment and hired many elites for the operation of this plant. He had sent the most experienced managers and workers, and equipped the plant with the third-generation machine tools powered by electricity to meet the production need. As such, the plant consumed most of the electricity in the industrial zone. Thanks to the Mystery Moon devices, otherwise he would have had to suspend the operation of all the other plants to keep this one running. In a way, this new plant displayed all the technologies developed in Neverwinter over the past 5 years. Barov had told Roland that Neverwinter residents took pride in working here. When the new plant was in operation, each workstation would be responsible for assembling one part. The plane assembly would start from the first workstation to the last. Workers would start with the frame, and then wings, then parts, then skins, and finally to the testing stage. However, the plant was far from ideal. There was only 1-inch Fire of Heaven waiting to be assembled at the workstation closest to the exit at present, and the other workstations were all empty. "Is everything okay? Did you have any problem?" Roland asked as he walked up to Anna. "I have tons of problems," Anna answered while shaking her head. "I don't know how many parts and materials workers had wasted before they successfully produced this plane." Roland was amused at the resigned look on Anna's face. He had foreseen the difficulties when he had made the decision to create planes. It was practically impossible to learn about new materials and techniques in a short period of time, despite that he had tried his best to simplify the production. For example, he had, specifically, created an assembly line to produce various drive rivets and brake mandrel rivets for the single riveted joints on the plane. Compared to traditional double riveted joints, single riveted joints were much easier to assemble. Roland had also numbered all the parts of the plane and drawn out every assembly step like those model assembly kits in his previous world. He had even installed user-friendly ports for parts that could be easily mixed up to reduce the possibility of assembly errors as a result of carelessness. Despite all his efforts, the workers only managed to produce one plane in the past half a month. Obviously, the assembly task was too hard for them to handle. "Do you need my help?" Tilly asked suddenly. "No, that's fine," Anna said while shrugging. She would only shrug and be less ladylike in front of a few people. "Roland asked me to supervise the workers, so I must solve the problems all by myself, no matter what they are, although I did want to give up a lot of times." Tilly smiled and said, "So, you're actually very happy, aren't you? Finally, there's one real plane." Anna curled up her lips and replied, "I know you'd see through me. If we have one plane, we'll have a second. Once all the workers have learned about the assembly process, we'll soon have more qualified planes," Tilly said as she glanced at Roland. "If you could praise her now, that'd be even better." "I never expect him to praise me," Anna said while twitching her lips. "Huh." Roland was dumbfounded. What had just happened? Why did they suddenly switch the subject from the plane production to him? Just then, a guard trotted to Roland and reported, "Your Majesty, the first fire of heaven is ready. We can start the celebration ceremony anytime." Roland thus rested his eyes again on the biplane and saw two logos on the light gray body, one the coat of arms of the royal family and the other a knight holding a spear while spreading out his arms. The whole plane looked extraordinary, but Roland felt that something was missing. He pondered for a while and suddenly realized what had missed. Then he waved his hand and said, "Get the ribbon." Soon, a bright red ribbon was tied to the plane, with a red ribbon flower attached to the propeller at the head of the jet. Roland then nodded in satisfaction. Now, the fire of heaven was ready to meet its audience. After that, he made a speech, cut the ribbon, and took a photograph with Anna, Tilly, and all the workers who had participated in the design and manufacture of the plane, as well as the brand new aircraft itself, which was now numbered 001 and parked behind them. "Now, look at me. 1, 2, 3. Soraya summoned the magic brush and recorded this historical moment. Chapter 1279, Conspiracy. "Your Excellency, Frost Town is right there at the front," a knight reported. Marwayne Parker raised the telescope and observed the town. This town was situated at the southwestern border of the Kingdom of Neverwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart, surrounded by mountains. One could see the view of the whole town anywhere from above. Due to the geographical advantage, the Lord here did not build any castle in the town. There were many towns like this one on the border of the two kingdoms. Marwayne would have paid it no notice in the past. But now, the town held a special place in his heart. Has the scout come back? Yes. He only paid townsmen several silver royals for the information, the knight said triumphantly. There's a unit of Grey Castle soldiers here. Not many of them, only about 40 to 50 people, and they show up every now and then. Why aren't they stationed here? The road beyond the border is treacherous, and it's rumored wild wolves often come out around that area. Refugees can't cross the border without guards. Marwayne immediately knew what he should do. The red mist did not spread out along the border. In fact, the area covered in the red mist was in the shape of a semicircle that kept expanding. Currently, the red mist originating from the Kingdom of Neverwinter had traveled beyond the king's city of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. Therefore, Marwayne was more comfortable to conduct a battle in his own country than having an expedition. Frost Town was on the border of the Kingdom of Wolfheart. As it was not very accessible to the public, refugees would seldom enter the Kingdom of Wolfheart from there. Compared to those major cities with advanced transportation facilities, Frost Town was as insignificant as a mosquito. This was exactly what Marwayne wanted. This meant that the Grey Castle men would not notice his movement, and the information given by the scout also confirmed his theory. Just like the old scholar had said, the demons would deal with those difficult Grey Castle men themselves. What he needed to do was just to stab them in the back. Whatever the outcome of the battle would be, once people learned about his role in this battle, they would fear him. Of course, the old scholar had developed more sophisticated plans to defeat the Grey Castle men. If their schemes were successful, he believed that the Grey Castle men would eventually slow down their movement, and then the Sky Lord would trust him even more. Let's head back. It's time to call a meeting and discuss the operation. Within half a day, Marwain had returned to the closest town and patrolled into the previous lord's mansion triumphantly. This mansion used to belong to an unknown baron who used to rule this area, but he had fled upon the arrival of the demons and the red mist, so Marwain took his residence as a matter of course. Although Frost Town was not under his jurisdiction yet, since Marwain only had the authority over the 4 cities in the northern region, he believed that the Parker family would continue to expand their territory. Soon, all the nobles gathered here and waited for Marwain to break the silence. The Duke surveyed each one of them and memorized their countenances and expressions. There were 45 people in the room, most of whom were knights, although some were barons. The person with the highest rank in this room was the previous lord of the northernmost port, Viscount Narnos. These nobles lost their lands and subjects to the Grey Castle men and immediately pledged allegiance to him after being promised that they would receive rewards. The number of the soldiers in this army had exceeded 300, including all the guards, squires and henchmen. With so many people and a carefully planned scheme, Marwain believed this would be a perfect opportunity to defeat the Grey Castle soldiers. More importantly, it was his first time using the enemy's weapons. The reason that the Grey Castle men had flattened the nobles in the Kingdom of Neverwinter was that they used weapons much faster and far more powerful than snow powder. Without the support of the Sky Lord, nobody would have been willing to fight the Grey Castle men, even if the number of the soldiers doubled. I wonder if you've prepared yourself for the upcoming battle? Marwain asked after clearing his throat. I think everyone has learned how to use the firearms, right? We just need to load the gun, take aims, and pull the trigger, don't we? Viscount Narnos said indignantly. Even savages know how to use them. I see no reason that we can't. The captives didn't tell us how to use the weapons until we tortured them. They were pretty reluctant to disclose the information. These weapons are really not a big deal. That's right. The weapons are ingenious indeed, but they're much easier to use than swords, a knight rejoined. I also interrogated the Grey Castle men. They just joined the army 2 years ago, and it only took them a month to learn how to use the firearms. However, I spent 5 years learning how to use swords. Those lowlives are foolish, and that's why it took them a month. I would only need 3 days to master it, another person spoke, and all the others guffawed. I'll let them know there'll be nothing without firearms. They rely on witches to produce firearms. I think the king of Grey Castle beated the church simply because the church was too busy dealing with the Kingdom of Neverwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart at that time. Marwain suddenly realized that those infuriated nobles were usable. They had been holding a grudge against the Grey Castle men for a long time. Although he had only built this new army a week ago and hardly knew anybody, at least, they were acting in concert for a common purpose, and everyone was eager to seek revenge. But the number of the bolts named bullet is limited, so each of us only has a few, the knight said while spreading out his hands. I hope that everyone could go easy on them and fire at a close range. Marwain cast the knight a glance of approval. His name is Fuller, a local from the western region. Marwain knew that he was pretty smart, and it appeared that Fuller had already grasped the key to the victory. Marwain was thinking of recruiting him later for his own use. Don't worry, Marwain said confidently. The Grey Castle men don't have many bullets either. The northwestern part of the Kingdom of Wolfheart is mountainous, which restrains their mobility. Also, they'll let us approach them. Their goal is to get refugees out of here, isn't it? Everybody sneered. That was right. Since the Grey Castle men came here for people, they would definitely not abandon the lambs that voluntarily came up to them. However, they did not know that wolves could also hide among those innocent lambs. It only took a second for a hunter to turn into a prey. By the time the Grey Castle men discovered the danger, it would have been too late. Then, they could disguise themselves as the Grey Castle soldiers and looted the towns on their way back. In that case, people would stop believing the Grey Castle men, and this immigration campaign would, as a matter of course, fail. I've let the Grey Castle men know that we'll go with them. I believe we'll soon hear back from them. Let's fight this battle out, and all the resources and food gained from this battle will be yours," Marwain proclaimed as he rose. "This is a great opportunity to avenge yourselves and gain lands and wealth. You have my words. It's time for the Grey Castle soldiers to pay for what they have done, everyone." Chapter 1280, Disguise. When Fishball ascended the crest of the mountain, his view suddenly expanded. Orange flowers carpeted the field and formed a glaring contrast with the road that meandered through the mountain. Wind rustled the flowers and refreshed the exhausted travelers. Against the sea of flowers loomed a small town, which was the destination of their trip, Frost Town. It was his 6th time climbing over the mountains. Although Fishball was the leader of the machine gun squad, he was also a soldier of the First Army. After receiving the instruction to expedite the evacuation process, like many soldiers, Fishball came to rescue refugees. He had not encountered any demons so far on this route, possibly because the red mist had not reached here or because the demons did not really want to waste their time on those refugees. Anyhow, the more people he brought to Neverwinter, the better. There were nearly 1,000 people following him. According to common practices, the army would first pitch their tents outside the town and get in touch with the refugees before they sent them to Neverwinter in group. The First Army had warned the residents during their first visit not to travel to the south alone, as the trip could be dangerous. They asked the residents to wait for the Grey Castle army to retrieve them. Nevertheless, not everyone would listen. In fact, Fishball had met many desperate refugees who had run out of food on their way. For those who were less fortunate, they simply died in the mountain on their own. But this time, Fishball found that things were a little different. From the mountain, he, surprisingly, saw many people in Frost Town. "Did some major city fall?" the squad scout Hansen whistled. "So many refugees in just around 10 days. We'll be very busy in the next few days." Fishball also felt excited. Only about 1,000 people had departed for Neverwinter over the past 1 to 2 months. It seemed that the number of the refugees this time would exceed that of the previous trip. Although Fishball did not understand why these refugees chose to come to this small town down the valley instead of other more accessible cities, he still had the obligation to send them to safer places. At this thought, the army sped up. Going downhill was apparently much faster than going uphill. About half an hour later, the unit reached the encampment in Frost Town. Many refugees had noticed them, and they soon swarmed up to the street and rushed toward the army. "Well, they're in such a haste," someone joked. "Didn't we tell them to wait in town? Perhaps they ran out of food and want some from us." Most of the soldiers held the same opinion. If there's a catastrophe in a neighboring city, then it makes sense that these people don't have food, Fishball commented and quickly made the decision. "But it's hard for us to count them and maintain the order. We have to stop these people. I need 10 soldiers to help me set up the checkouts. The others shall keep them in order." Fishball knew there would be serious consequences if they failed to stop the refugees. If they all rushed forward at once, those refugees would be no different than bandits. Most of the time, there was a very thin line between refugees and bandits. "Yes, sir." The soldiers were soon dispersed. All of them grasped their guns. As the refugees slowly approached, they could see them more clearly. Fishball raised the amplifier and turned up the volume to the maximum. "This is the rescue team of the First Army of Grey Castle. Please stay calm and stop right away to wait for further instructions. We have ample food and medicine, but you'll need to cooperate. Again, stop where you are, otherwise, we'll take hard measures." Some people hesitated but soon resumed to run, as though something were pushing them from behind. Fishball frowned. He then asked his team member to fire into the air as a warning. Just then, Hansen whistled. What's the matter?" Fishball asked. "Leader, they look a bit strange," Hansen said while watching through the telescope. "Have you seen any refugees take a roll of cloth with them before?" "A roll of cloth?" Fishball echoed in bewilderment. He grabbed the telescope from Hansen and saw about 300 meters away, These refugees were running toward them. He could roughly tell what they were wearing and carrying. Like Hansen had said, most of them were carrying a roll of cloth on the back or at the waist. It was indeed very strange. Refugees would normally take all their belongings with them, and the First Army would usually ask them to abandon heavy luggage and take light items that would not cause inconvenience to the trip, such as gold royals. Generally, the Army would not interfere with refugees' personal affairs. During the past 2 months, Fishball had seen various strange personal items, but it was his first time seeing rolls of cloth. The more he looked at them, the more strange they appeared. These refugees were all in rags, but surprisingly, they were all wearing shoes. Their clothes were not old or worn at all. Instead, it appeared to Fishball that the clothes had been made look old just very recently. Now, the two parties were only 200 meters away from each other. Bang! His team member again issued the warning. The crowd was immediately dispersed, and the next moment, Fishball froze to the ground. The shot frightened some refugees at the front, who unrolled the cloth and revealed the rifle that the First Army usually used underneath. Soon, all of them revealed their weapons from underneath their cloth. They were carrying all kinds of weapons, including swords and tridents. Fishball suddenly realized that this was a trap. Retreat to the encampment. Fishball yelled at his team members. Run! No sooner had he finished than the disguised refugees started to fire. Bullets whistled past Fishball and exhaled dusts and earth. The other 9 soldiers from the First Army finally realized what had happened and hurried to the campsite while lowering their heads. The unit had camped there several times. Although there were no trenches or blockhouses, they had built fortresses. These fortresses constructed with sand and stones were designed to fight demons, but now, they had to rely on them to avoid the attack of the refugees. By the time Fishball reached the fortresses, all his team members had crouched down. They were now utterly outnumbered, for there were more than 40 enemies while they only got 9 people. Fishball's heart leaped to his throat when he thought of the possibility that all of them would be shot dead unprepared on the battlefield. He seized Hansen's arm and said, "Go see how everyone's doing, now." Hansen immediately left, and Fishball held up the gun and aimed at the running refugees. No. They were not real refugees but nobles that had submitted to the demons. Only the demons could obtain so many weapons from the First Army. Damn it! Fishball swore under his breath. He had never expected that his own kind would disguise as refugees and set up such a nasty trap. Did they not know who they were helping? In a few minutes, Hansen came back, which was faster than Fishball had thought. Hansen reported, "Everyone's fine, except one soldier. He's got minor injuries, but he can still fight." Fishball stiffened for a second. Just one person? He remembered that the refugees had shot quite fiercely. Yes, Hansen confirmed, looking hugely relieved. "We're pretty lucky. Now, everyone has returned to their positions. We'll fight to the last." Chapter 1281, A Deadlock. That's right. Fight to the last. The campsite was against hills, so it was impossible to retreat to the crest against the gunfire. As each rescue team acted separately, they would not get reinforcements anytime soon. Considering the precarious situation, Fishball judged that the best way to repel the enemies was to hold on to this encampment. Not only far outnumbered, most of the soldiers only brought food and clothes with them. There was not even a single HMG on the campsite, so they were not able to defeat the enemies with advanced, long-distance weapons. This was going to be a 50 to 1,000 situation. Fishball admitted that he was scared at this moment, but he was no longer the coward who used to only think about escapes. As the unit leader, he had the obligation to get his whole team out of the dilemma. He must have those refugees pay the price before he died here. Apparently, his team members were also thinking the same thing, for they were now letting the enemies approach them. Currently, the two parties were less than 200 meters from each other. Since they had limited ammunition, the most efficient way to kill the refugees was to shoot at a close range. In the meantime, the enemies would also fire more accurately as the distance between the two parties shortened. This method was, therefore, a double-edged sword, and at present, willpower determined everything. Fishball waited for nearly a minute for the enemies to approach. Finally, they were at 100 meters from the First Army soldiers. Within this distance, he could already see the faces of these traitors through the telescope. His suspicion was thus confirmed. Unlike windswept and weary refugees, most of them looked poised and self-assured. There was not the slightest sign of reluctance in their active demeanor. He did not have to worry about having innocent blood shed anymore. Fishball aimed at the enemy at the very front and pulled the trigger. His team members also fired at the same time. In an instant, gunshots rented the air above the encampment. As the enemies at the front fell, the rest of them all slowed down and began to shoot at the First Army as well. Fishball was not sure whether these refugees had learned to use the firearms by themselves or they had received some sort of training from the demons. Anyway, both parties started to shoot each other. Just at that moment, the enemies pushed a few two-wheeled trailers covered with cloth to the front. Fishball was familiar with this type of transportation tool. Compared to a carriage or a mule, a trailer was more often used for moving and carrying heavy cargo. He had thought that the enemies used these trailers simply to make themselves look more like refugees, and he was surprised to see that they had not abandoned those props yet. It was not until the enemies uncovered the cloth that Fishball realized that it was a Mark I type HMG underneath. The enemies began to fire. The rain of bullets immediately suppressed the attack of the First Army. It appeared that the bullets that the enemies were using were all tracers, and the HMG was much more accurate than bolt rifles. The whole encampment was thus stirred. Dust and mud flew in all directions. Thanks to the fortresses, the soldiers from the First Army were still able to fight back. Fortunately, the enemies did not fire from far away but carried the HMG along as they charged. The machine gun was, therefore, only around 200 meters away from the defensive line. Since the First Army was fairly scattered, the enemies had time to position. "Hansen!" Fishball yelled. Hansen gestured that he understood and ran toward the edge of the fortresses while carrying his gun. The First Army seldom ran into a disadvantageous position because of the lack of weapons. According to the operation manual, once the army was short of ammunition, the soldiers should immediately request for the support of the artillery at the rear or concentrate on suppressing the enemy's gunfire. Apparently, in the current situation, the only thing that the unit could do was to shoot directly to deter the enemies. While the enemies were reloading the HMG, Fishball and his team members fired ferociously to distract the enemies. Hansen also successfully shot down the gunners on the trailers. Those who attempted to clamber onto the trailers were immediately shot dead one by one. Without the support of the HMG, the charging enemies were soon repulsed, and the battle went back to the beginning. "Damn it! Why haven't they taken the campsite yet?" Marwain complained irritably as he looked up at the sinking sun while stomping impatiently. "Viscount Narnos, your guys are all cravens, aren't they? What takes them so long to crush a unit? If they can't win by the end of the day, we'll let the Grey Castle men escape right under our noses." As the commanders, the nobles did not have to fight at the front in person like their squires and mercenaries. Plus, the Grey Castle men never followed the rules of war between nobles. They never reserved their power or exchanged captives. The nobles knew perfectly well the arrogant attitude of the Grey Castle men. Charging at the front would not bring them any honor or respect but only a miserable defeat. "They're doing their best, and your men aren't any better than mine either," Narnos retorted indignantly. "You have the greatest army, but they're all at the rear. If your main force moved a little bit forward to the front, we would have taken the encampment a long time ago." Marwain was at a loss for words. He rested his eyes upon the front again and promised to himself that he would seek revenge later. "Once I become the king of Everwinter, you'll pay for your insolence." However, right now, Marwain knew that he must win. Otherwise, the Skylord would abandon him. He did not understand why the battle took so long. Everything went well as planned. To fool the Grey Castle men, They did not set up the ambush in the town or surround their encampment but awaited in this valley so that both parties would have a clear view of the opponent's force. He had considered every single detail of this operation to make sure that they would not blow their cover. He had even killed all the townsmen who might possibly give away their true identity. In fact, just as he had planned, the Grey Castle men did not raise any suspicion until they were several hundred meters from each other. The nobles had far more firearms and soldiers than their opponent, and this battle should have ended in a second. Why did they still not gain the campsite? Even if every one of the Grey Castle soldier possessed a weapon, there were only 50 of them, but the alliance army of the nobles had more than 200 guns. Marwain was indebted to a belief that the Grey Castle soldiers should have been vanquished under such an unfavorable condition. But the reality seemed to be exactly the opposite. The alliance army could not move any further from the hill, and for many times, they had been repelled by the gunfire of the Grey Castle soldiers. Their attack, however, had not weakened the Grey Castle men at all, as though the enemies were possessed of an unusual power that enabled them to operate several guns at the same time. The flintlocks that Marwain had put great faith in were almost ineffective. They not only failed to break the spirit of the Grey Castle soldiers, but a lot of times, they wounded their own soldiers. From the top of the hill, Marwain could see bodies litter around the flintlocks, so nobody had the courage to operate them anymore. If things went on like that, everything he had dreamed of would remain as a dream. The kingdom of Neverwinter did not possess technologies to produce bullets. If he could not obtain sufficient ammunition after this battle, he would have no chance to win the Grey Castle men again. "Don't worry, your lordship," Fuller comforted. "As far as I see, the enemies fire less frequently now, which indicates that they're running out of ammunition. Just in a few minutes, we'll fight this battle out in the traditional way. Remember that the Grey Castle men only have flintlocks, but we have everything." "But in that case, we won't be able to get more ammunition from them," Marwain thought to himself in anguish. He would have to ask the Skylord for more. The most pressing task for him now was to eliminate these Grey Castle soldiers as soon as possible. Marwain thus summoned a guard and ordered, "Tell them that the reward I promised earlier will double if they win this battle, and the first one who enters the enemy's campsite will receive 100 gold royals." Chapter 1282, The Battle is to the Strong. Fishball noticed the change in the situation. He was now betting his life on this battle, but, surprisingly, the enemies were weaker than he had expected. When he had been fighting against the demons on the Feral Plains back then, he could hardly breathe, and all he could do was to fire. His entire body had gone numb. However, at present, he could still keep an eye on his team members and the enemies, and had the ability to think about what step the opponent would possibly take next. As the enemies were repelled several times, their moves significantly slowed down. The first army shot less frequently. To save ammunition, they only fired when the Alliance army charged. The last shot was about an hour ago. The consequence would be unbearable for the Alliance army if this deadlock continued under the current circumstances when there was no reinforcement. The First Army was on the higher land under the protection of the fortresses in a more advantageous firing position. Fishball did not understand why the commander of the enemies chose to stand with his arms folded. Unlike a traditional battle where soldiers had to fight at a close range, this battle was apparently more dangerous and intense, for the soldiers could be shot anytime. The commander's indifference would definitely have a negative impact on the soldiers' morale. In fact, the Alliance army had commenced to retreat. Fishball had witnessed that some soldiers had retreated somewhere around 100 meters farther, and the whole frontier was on the brink of a collapse. This fact indicated that the Alliance army had just been built temporarily. The soldiers, in general, lacked trust and cooperation. In addition to that, Fishball had also noticed that the enemies were not really good at using flintlocks. They were simply imitating the First Army in a very clumsy way, failing to make the best of use out of the weapons. Otherwise, the First Army would not have been able to hold up for so long. It was incredible that out of the 10 soldiers, only 5 sustained injuries, and nobody was killed. He could not attribute this outcome totally to luck anymore. "Can someone pass me some bullets?" Mine ran out. Same here. I only have one cartridge left. Leader, what should we do next? Hansen trotted up to Fishball while bending his head. No enemy is around the machine gun anymore. Shall we retreat tonight? Fishball stared up at the sky. It was now around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the sun sank faster than usual in fall. Within 1 hour and a half, darkness would creep in. By that time, it would be a lot safer for them to operate, and they could possibly even turn their back against the enemies. However, Fishball always hesitated when it came to a retreat. It was true that the firing accuracy would significantly drop at night, but the First Army would not be able to use the firearms either. More importantly, if the enemies launched an attack again and came after them, could they successfully repel them once more? Had they currently had sufficient ammunition, they could have then probably retreated before the enemies got prepared for a second attack. However, if things went on like this, the nobles would soon notice that the First Army shot less frequently and thereby predict their next move. Also, 2 people sustained relatively serious injuries, which further slowed the unit down. Fishball could not abandon his team members. He hesitated for a while and finally made up his mind. Then, he said, "Ask everyone to come here. I want to say something." A moment later, Hansen brought the other team members. The enemies seemed to have not noticed that the First Army had confined their shooting range. They were still lying on the ground on their stomachs while firing occasionally. Fishball was thus more certain about his decision. He briefly talked about the current situation and then surveyed the whole team. His Majesty often says that an attack is the best defense. If we could defeat these nobles, we don't need to worry about them coming back anymore. However, if we retreat now, we'd leave them a chance to fight back. So, it's time to make a choice. We could either let the enemies determine our fate or control our own destiny. I want to hear your opinions on that. Leader, do you mean that we shall attack them instead? Hansen asked in surprise. They have far more people than us. I thought about that already. They do outnumber us, but most of them don't want to fight anymore. They just haven't realized it when firing at a distance. If we could quash their most powerful troop, we could possibly break their spirit. But we don't have much ammunition left. According to the operation manual, the First Army doesn't always rely on weapons, Fishball said solemnly. A silence descended on the campsite. Hansen was the first one to speak. I'm with the leader. Me too, leader. I want everyone to stick together. Whether we leave or not, we should always act together. Issue your command, leader. The soldiers shouted. Fishball nodded solemnly. He would not have made such a decision had this occurred in the past. After serving in the army for 4 years, he did feel that something had changed. I see that you aren't a craven now. A bright, silvery voice came to him. Fishball took a deep breath and proclaimed slowly, "Everyone, install the bayonet." Although their weapons had upgraded from the traditional flintlock to the bolt rifle, and the structure of the gun had changed a lot, the bayonet had always been there, only that it now functioned better. The soldiers thus all drew out their swords and inserted them into the grooves. Fishball slid the last clip into the bore, raised his arm and yelled, "Follow me." He rushed out of the fortresses first. The other team members followed at his heels and streaked toward the enemies closest to them. The enemies had apparently no idea what was going on. Many of them did not even rise but simply shot at the First Army mechanically. Fishball was prepared to get shot, but the pain he had been waiting for did not come. It was not until they had covered a distance of 100 meters that the enemies finally stood bolt upright, rooted to the ground, with their rifles in their hands, totally dumbfounded. Fishball stabbed the enemies with his bayonet in the way he was trained. Go! His team members followed and rushed toward the enemies. The air was filled with the soldiers' shoutings. Fishball stabbed one soldier, shot another dead, and then turned around to stab the third one until he noticed that there was no enemy around him anymore. The Alliance army had started to flee. They had probably never anticipated that the First Army would come out of their campsite at this moment and fight at a close range. They could not stand the intense battle anymore. The battle was to the strong. The Alliance army was soon flattened after several weak attempts of resistance. The panic was infectious. When the soldiers at the front began to retreat, the ones at the rear all dropped their weapons and fled. Many people fell, rolled down the hill and hit the soldiers running at the front. The First Army thus easily obtained the HMG and started to fire at the running soldiers. The enemies moved their two legs as fast as they could. Had the First Army had enough ammunition, these soldiers would probably have not been able to escape. Fishball did not stop until his two legs gave away. The enemies on the hill all knelt down, raised their arms and yielded. The nobles at the rear were the first ones to leave. Fishball could not see a single one of them now. He clenched his fists, feeling a sense of achievement steal through him. Before he could savor the victory, his team member rushed toward him and pushed him down to the ground. "Leader, we won. Long live His Majesty. Long live the First Army." Multiple hands reached out to him, and Fishball was thrown up in the air. Yes, they had won. Nothing was better than seeing everyone alive. Fishball spread out his hands in the sunset and also yelled with his soldiers in excitement. Chapter 1283, The Source of Information. At the Sedimentation Bay in the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The news of the victory of this counter-ambush soon reached Iron Axe. Iron Axe immediately dispatched a letter through the carrier pigeon, in which he not only heaped praises on Fishball for his excellent leadership skill but also instructed the unit to stay safe while waiting for the reinforcement. Although the enemy in this battle was simply an alliance army organized by nobles, their quick reaction and outstanding performance set a great example for the whole army. Advertising this unusual victory would definitely raise the morale of the First Army in a more significant way than continuing to retrieve refugees, especially when the whole army was in the process of retreating. Not a long time ago, Iron Axe had actually received two pieces of bad news, one of which was that the soldiers in the Red Mist area were thwarted by the local nobles who had agreed to help the demons. According to the report, these knights from the Kingdom of Neverwinter were currently attacking the units responsible for retrieving refugees. Apparently, these knights, being also human, were better at hindering the evacuation campaign than the demons. As it was quite dangerous for the First Army to advance to the depth of the Red Mist area, most of the time the soldiers simply stayed outside the Red Mist zone. As such, there were fewer people actually helping evacuate the cities. The other bad news was that the demons' attack became more fierce. First of all, a large number of devil beasts flew out of the Red Mist zone in the southeast and off to the Archduke Island. Then, the garrison on the island got prepared for the upcoming war and suspended the service of marine transportation. However, the devil beasts, incredibly, disappeared from the sky above the two outposts and reappeared above a temporary evacuation unit on the island. Very unfortunately, however, the unit had just been informed that the devil beast would head to the east and was, therefore, retreating as fast as they could at that moment. They thus ran right into the demons. Although the unit resisted ferociously, they were vanquished. Iron Axe had yet received a full statistical report, but the reinforcement told him that nearly 2,000 refugees had been attacked. The army had lost at least 100 people. Considering the substantial loss, Iron Axe had no choice but to slow down the campaign. The two incidents created a chain reaction. The general staff had indeed foreseen the possibility of a betrayal by the nobles, but they had not expected that it would happen that fast. The noble families in the Kingdom of Neverwinter had been fighting for nearly 2 years for the throne, but they now, ironically, united together because of the demons. It was obvious that the immigration campaign was drawing to its end. Now, the First Army needed to recuperate and defend the Red Mist zone on the border. There were approximately 5,000 soldiers at the Cage Mountain and the Sedimentation Bay, which was not even 1/6 of the total force. Iron Axe did not know what the demons' military force was. Before he had that information, he could not lose any more soldiers. What Iron Axe was worried about most was that the demons might attack the unmanned areas before the First Army assembled. In that case, they would not only lose these new territories but also those they had occupied. There was no such things as armored train that could serve as a mobile fortress in the kingdom of Wolfheart. Just then, a soldier entered the study and reported, "Sir, the chief of the general staff, Miss Edith Kent, just arrived at the port." "Really?" Iron Axe said while knitting his brows. This was such good timing, for he was just hoping that Edith could give him some advice. "Great. I'll meet her at the port." At the dock, Iron Axe saw that the Pearl of the Northern region was surrounded by a group of clerks in the general staff. Everyone looked profoundly relieved at the sight of her. For a moment, they had completely forgotten how she used to torment them. Within a year after she assumed the office of the Chief of the General Staff, Edith was widely acknowledged and highly respected among her subordinates. Iron Axe was impressed with the great difference between Edith, the daughter of a former duke, and the nobles in the kingdom of Neverwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart. "Mr. Commander-in-Chief," Edith said while staring at Iron Axe after she bowed. "It has been a long time since we last saw each other. I hope my clerks didn't create you too much trouble." "They all did a good job," Iron Axe replied as he administered a military salute as a return. Since he and Edith had the same rank, their communication was always straightforward without any unnecessary formalities. In fact, apart from Roland and Lady Silvermoon, Edith was the only person that Iron Axe was willing to speak with voluntarily. "In other words, they didn't give you any pleasant surprise?" Edith said while shrugging and then turned to her clerks. "It seems that your performance isn't very satisfactory." Iron Axe curled up his lips. Miss Pearl of the Northern region always had a sharp tongue. He thus said, "If we could win the war, they aren't that bad." Edith did not insist on the topic but said, "By the way, I brought the new weapon created by His Majesty based on the latest intelligence. Are you interested in it?" Iron Axe's face lit up. He replied immediately, "Of course. Please lead the way." They thus went to the heavily guarded unloading area, which had already been sealed off by the soldiers. Huge wooden boxes were coming off the ship and were placed neatly at a corner. Many cases had been opened, revealing the weapons covered in parchment paper. Iron Axe soon noticed a small cannon. "That's the one," Edith said with a smile. "This 75 mm caliber cannon is the most expensive firearm among all. His Majesty wants it to fill the blank between the mortar and the longsword cannon. No which is required for its shipment. A horse or 2 people would suffice. Also, it's portable, and another person can carry the shells." "This reminds me of the original field artillery," Iron Axe said with a nod and immediately figured out what this light weapon was used for. Compared to the anti-demon grenade and the mortar that had a relatively short shooting range, this new cannon could be used to attack the robust spider demon. With this weapon, the soldiers at the front could immediately take some measures against the spider demon without necessarily building a battlement for the artillery. "As for the new rifle there, it's a semi-auto weapon," Edith explained as she proceeded. "The testing result is pretty good. 2 or 3 rifles could be as powerful as a heavy machine gun. You must know the person who created this. He's the battalion commander of the artillery battalion, Vanner. Although His Majesty later modified the weapon, the gun is named after Vanner. But this is only a substitute. We're currently in the process of producing a real automatic gun and will send you the final product once it's ready. The one farthest to you is the latest anti-demon grenade. Its caliber is much larger than the previous one. I believe that the Ministry of Chemical Industry has improved it." The group was gradually dispersed. By the time Iron Axe reached the edge of the dump site, only he and Edith were there. "What's the matter? Did the battle not go well?" Edith asked suddenly. It was a second later before Iron Axe realized that Edith had separated him from the crowd deliberately. "You knew? You wouldn't have greeted me at the dock in such a haste if that wasn't the case." "I know I can't fool you," Iron Axe sighed and told Edith the recent news and what he was worrying about. "Before the transportation resumed, we still need a few months to assemble the army and gather ammunition. The demons could attack us anytime. Even if Miss Sylvie, Lightning and Maggie come, they can't monitor everything. The war is about to begin, but we have little information of our enemy. This isn't a good sign. I see, Edith said meditatively. I can't do anything about the transportation, but it isn't hard to gather intelligence. You had an idea already? You can put that way. You're only thinking about the First Army, and that's why you feel it difficult. Edith said slowly, the demons used nobles to attain their ends, but they've also created us an opportunity. As long as those cities are not evacuated, we would be able to infiltrate the enemy. Truth seemed to suddenly dawn on Iron Axe. He said, You're not talking about the First Army soldiers, are you? Of course not. Soldiers are not good at those stuff. Rats and civilians are better options. I prefer natives, so they won't easily expose themselves. There are tons of ways to have them work for you, Edith said smilingly. By the way, didn't you receive a black card earlier? Try to contact them. Chapter 1284, Infiltration. When Roland received the report jointly written by the commander of the First Army and the chief of the General Staff, he immediately thought of the spy movies he had watched. This was apparently a very feasible plan. He even thought more about the plan than Edith. Spy was an ancient profession, and it had various names in different times, but the spy Roland was familiar with were those in World War I and World War II. Early intelligence collection was simply a two-way communication without a systematic organization. As the government tightened their control over people, spies and agents found it increasingly hard to escape the scrutiny, and that was the time when a well-organized system was established. This also meant that in a feudal country ruled by nobles, spies could be anywhere. Once those agents received some professional training and learned cunning tricks to protect themselves, they would never be found even if the whole city was turned upside down. They were like shadows slinking in the city, whose presence never raised the awareness of the people who received their tips. Even Nightingale would fail to get anything out of them upon an interrogation. Roland thus approved the proposal at once. However, he was not planning to entrust this task totally to Edith. This, nonetheless, had nothing to do with trust. Intelligence collection could be time-consuming. He would rather Edith focus more on the big picture of the plan than a specific project. Otherwise, it would be a total waste of Edith's talent. He would need a professional to deal with this matter. Roland spread open a letter and put Il Fox at the top. The Kingdom of Dawn had been quite peaceful recently. This former ringmaster must be very bored at the moment. After Nightingale handed the letter to Honey, Roland started to consider about another thing. That was an intelligence-gathering network. Before, he had only needed to take care of the war and political matters within Grey Castle. However, ever since the expedition to Tequila, it had taken the carrier pigeon a much longer time to commute. Thanks to the support of the Seagull, Roland was still able to receive information in a timely manner. Nevertheless, they were now waging a war in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, and Roland noticed a significant delay in communication. For example, the report he was currently reading had been written a week ago and had been shipped by sea. Although animal messengers would make things a lot faster, he would still need to wait for at least 2 or 3 days. More importantly, Honey did not have a lot of messengers that could fly more than 1,000 kilometers. She could only control the behavior of the animals but not change it. Plus, Honey was not powerful enough to support the communication throughout the entire western region even for short-distance messengers, let alone the communication throughout the whole nation and beyond Grey Castle. There was actually a limit in the number of the animals she could control. Therefore, how to efficiently deliver messages was also a huge problem that needed to be solved after this intelligence-gathering network was established. Roland knew very well that the ultimate solution would be radio communication. The telegraph technologies were simple, but like telephones, the communication through telegraphs relied largely on reception. Normally, the signal could only cover a distance of 100 kilometers without a repeater like an electron tube that could amplify signals. However, if he could invent an electron tube, he would also be able to create radios. There was no electromagnetic pollution in this era. The sound produced by tuned electromagnetic waves was very similar to the crying of a baby. He would only need to erect an antenna on the top of the impassable mountain range to receive messages thousands of kilometers away. If he could successfully create radios, it would only take a few minutes to transmit the report from the front to his office. If every soldier in the army was equipped with a portable radio, that would be even more helpful to the war than the radiation project. Nevertheless, Roland had no idea where to start and how. Perhaps, it was time to ask the design bureau of Grey Castle to work on more projects. Roland entered the dream world at night. After he sent Zero off to school, he drove to the construction site of the Clover Group in the southern suburb. Guard was indeed an efficient businessman. He fulfilled his promise at once. Not only did he authorize Roland to manage the plant, but the plant was refurbished as well. The rusty wall was painted, and the facilities were renewed. Had the Clover Group not insisted on demolishing the apartment building, Roland would have loved to deal with Guard and conducted more business with him. He parked his vehicle and found the yard outside the plant look a bit strange. Normally, few people came here, but today, there were a lot of workers. He also heard deep, heavy roar of machineries. Roland quickly passed through the crowd and saw a queer caterpillar machine in front of him. Only the lower part of the machine was currently completed. There was nothing special about the caterpillar and the wheels per se. What attracted these workers was the distinctive steam-powered piston at the top and another tractor that produced steam. Roland burst into a laugh. So that was Master Xia's idea. To minimize the impact of the imaginary boiler and water tank, he installed this part of the machine onto a tractor so that he could test out both of them at the same time. The tractor not only had to run on its own, but it also needed to power the caterpillar machine. The principle was so similar to that of the solar torchlight that would only work when there was light. Ahem, hey, boss, Master Xia, having realized the awkwardness of the machine, greeted Roland in embarrassment. Roland praised him heartily, good job. This is exactly what I want. He came here to check the progress of the project. Last time when he had come here, Master Xia had only completed the frame of the tractor. But now, the tractor was finished. Master Xia indeed had put a lot of efforts into it. Really? Master Xia said while scratching his scalp. Are you sure your collector friends are interested in this kind of thing? Did you make the parts of the tester with machine tools? Yes, I can assure you about that, Master Xia replied quickly as he massaged his hands. But I bought the tractor, the boiler and the water tank. They're all second-handed, and it cost me around 300,000 yen. Money isn't a problem, Roland dismissed his concern while waving his hand. The Clover Group would pay everything. As long as they were manually made, my friend will be satisfied. Keep up the great work. Once the deal is successfully closed, I'll double your salary as a bonus. Chapter 1285, 5 Pairs of Road Wheels. Master Xia's face instantly split into a bright smile, but the woman next to him heaved an almost inaudible sigh. Roland naturally noticed her. After he started to absorb the magic cores in the dream world, his power continuously grew, and he also became more sensitive about the subtle changes around him. Although few people noticed the woman, Roland still caught sight of her in the corner of his eyes. This woman was the secretary and financial advisor sent by Guard. Her name was Cheng, and she had just graduated from a very prominent university. Cheng was a pretty, talented and efficient worker, a gifted woman, so to speak. Only she knew that the Clover Group bore all the expenses incurred by this project, and the actual boss did not have to pay anything. Perhaps, Cheng thought Roland was taking advantage of the corporation, so she did not have a very high opinion of him. Roland, however, did not care about that. He simply needed to give her a raise as well so that she would not complain anymore. Of course, this is the joint work of all the staff, Roland said while smiling at the secretary. If we succeed, I'll double the salary for everyone in the plant. Yes, quite right. You're very considerate, boss, Master Xia rejoined while nodding vigorously. No. This is not what I meant. Ching had not expected that Roland would see through her mind. Abashed, she said, "I was just wondering when the corporation could profit." Roland waved his hand and said, "We will one day. Don't worry. All of my friends have great ambitions. The corporation will definitely profit from this project. Just wait for the raise." "Awesome. Awesome," Master Xie said as though he had realized his long-term dream. All the wrinkles on his smiling face were smoothened. "By the way," Roland said while looking toward Ching, "I have a new project to work on. Come with me to the office." "Boss," Master Xie stopped Roland when the latter was about to leave. "Do you have any other requirements for this tractor? For example, the style and the color?" It appeared that Master Xie really believed that Roland was making props. Roland shook his head in amusement and said, "As long as it functions well, I don't care about such things very much. But please go ahead. If possible, I wish the final products could have 5 pairs of road wheels." "Not a problem at all," Master Xie promised while patting his chest. "I thought about the mobility of the machine when I designed it. Place the matter in my hand." As all the workers in the plant ran out to watch the testing of the tractor, the whole plant became exceptionally quiet. Roland noticed that Ching had distanced from him after they entered the workshop. She had moved a little farther from him, and the distance between the two increased from the initial 2 meters to 5 meters. Roland was quite amused at her action. It seemed that Guard had not told her that Roland was actually a martialist. Otherwise, she should have known that when a martialist attempted to sexually harass a girl, the girl would not be able to escape even if she was 50 meters away from the former. But Roland did not care about his personal image among his employees, as he only wanted his workers to work hard. Roland sat straight in his seat after getting into the messy office. He jumped right into the business and said, "Well, I have a friend. Here it goes." Ching thought to herself. Every time he talked about a new project, he started with a friend of his. Who would like to squander thousands of hundreds of dollars on tons of rubbish? Ching knew that some wealthy people did have strange hobbies, but the boss in front of her did not look remotely like a successful entrepreneur from an affluent family. She was confident of her own judgment. She graduated from a top university and knew a lot of wealthy people, but she had never seen anyone dress so simple as the boss. True rich people always treated themselves well even if they wanted to keep a low profile. They might purchase clothes by an indie brand, but what they wore and used must be expensive and of good quality. Many young people tended not to, in fact, exhibit their wealth to the public, but this Mr. Roland was wearing the cheapest clothes normally sold by street vendors, without wearing any accessories. Even his vehicle was a battered minivan. He was not keeping a low profile at all. He was simply poor. How was that possible that he had wealthy friends? Ching was hired by the Clover Group, the biggest corporation in this city, right after her graduation. She wanted to add some impressive work experience to her resume, but she had not expected that her boss would send her to this small factory to look after so many weird projects. She even started to suspect whether Mr. Guard was scammed, or whether he intended to use this plant to do some shady business. She was astonished after hearing Roland mention radio communication. Ching massaged her forehead while letting out a sigh. This kind of walkie-talkie only cost less than 100 yen online, and they could also directly purchase an antique telegraph machine without necessarily making it by themselves. However, Roland wanted to produce them from scratch like the tractor. Everything must be handmade, including all the parts. This was purely wasting money. I don't need professionals. New graduates or people who love radio technologies would do. You can set up a room outside the plant as their office so that I don't have to travel back and forth, Roland explained in detail. Whatever equipment they need, just approve it. Remember, however, that all the parts should be produced here. They don't have to be perfect though. In fact, the worse the quality is, the better. Make them as desolate and dilapidated as possible. My friend likes that kind of stuff. That's different than giving a raise. I'll have to report to Mr. Guard. That's fine, Roland said indifferently. I think he'll agree. Just then, his cell phone rang. It was from the Martialist Association. Roland picked up the phone after Ching left. "Hello, Mr. Roland, Rock," the Defender's calming voice came over the line. "I have a new task for you. Are you available to pay a visit to Greenleaf Sanatorium this afternoon?" Since the Design Bureau of Grey Castle entirely relied on Rock's support, Roland could not refuse the request. As Roland had eliminated the magic creatures coming out of the erosion last time, the fallen evils had been pretty quite recently, as if they had sensed the danger and withdrawn from this city. As such, the Tequila Witches did not find many fallen evils to fight. Roland believed that things were not that simple. The fallen evils were aiming for the forces of nature of the awakened, through which they could further weaken the dream world. With the attack of the Prism City and the beginning of the Martialist contest, many Martialists had gathered here, so the fallen evils had no reason to leave. It would save Roland a lot of time if the association obtained new information regarding the fallen evils. Chapter 1286, The Otherworld. "How are you feeling?" Fei Yuan asked as she entered room 402 with a stack of books in her arms and placed the books on the nightstand. Valkyrie said with a nod, "Thank you. I can walk now. The doctor says I'll fully recover in a week." "That's good. You really have excellent self-repairing ability even as a martialist," Fei Yuan said with a smile. "Really? The influence of the force of nature on each person is different. Not every martialist could recover within 1 month when his leg bones are crushed like yours. You probably haven't seen any martialists sustain such severe injuries before, so you don't know your potential." Fei Yuan paused for a second and said, "You should be one of the top martialists in your city, right? Why do you think so?" "My master often says that the strong one is strong in every aspect. The fact that you recover so fast means that you have a strong body and a great immune system. People like you were born to be a martialist, like me," Fei Yuan said flatly. "We may see who's stronger once you recover." "That's the reason you asked me to join your team?" Valkyries asked, a little resigned. "You're the genius in the association. I don't think you could learn anything new from me." "That's fine. You've been lying in bed for a long time. Practicing with a good martialist can help you regain your power. Fallen evils would not sympathize you because you had injuries before." Valkyries nodded after a moment of silence and then said, "All right then. Thank you." "Not a problem," Fei Yuan returned while curling up her lips. "By the way, I went to downtown yesterday and bought some desserts from the Kargard Peninsula. I put them in the bag on the top of the books. I hope you like them. The food in the hospital isn't very tasty." At that moment, Valkyries noticed that Fei Yuan swallowed. People from the Kargard Peninsula did eat regular food, but it was rumored that they could not distinguish the good and the bad. Only the food grown in their native town could satisfy their special need. Fei Yuan had once tried their unique food but discovered that she could not take it. Only a few people appreciated the taste and claimed that they were the most delicious food in the world, although the public did not really buy the idea. Therefore, only a few shops were specialized in selling food from the Kargard Peninsula. After all, not many people live there. "Thank you," Valkyrie said while trying not to reveal her true thought. "That's nothing. I'm the captain, and it's my duty to take care of my team members," Fei Yuan said while waving her hand. "By the way, you do like reading." "Yes, I tend to do some reading when I'm bored." "That's a good habit. There's no entertainment in the sanatorium except books. If you want more books, just let me know." "Thanks." There was then an awkward silence, except for the rustling sound of the book when Valkyries flipped over the pages. Fei Yuan looked out of the window at the scenery outside. It was a nice and clear day. A few willows dipped into the water, and the lake rippled slowly in the breezes. A group of swans were sliding across the lake, leaving white reflections in the water. This was indeed a nice place for convalescence. However, Fei Yuan was watching Valkyries in the corner of her eyes constantly. From the reflection on the window, she could see Valkyre's every move. Fei Yuan was not a kind-hearted girl and had no interest in forcing people to fight with her. She requested a duel simply because she had discovered a month ago that this person might know Roland. That was not quite accurate. More precisely, Valkyries knew Roland, but Roland regarded her as a different person. Roland was actually testing whether she was the person he knew when he had asked those weird questions in the hospital. Fei Yuan was pretty sure that her speculation was correct. However, what bewildered her was that Roland had not revealed any sign of hostility against Valkyries during the conversation. He was, instead, pretty relaxed, which indicated that whether Valkyries was an acquaintance of his or not, she constituted no threat. Nevertheless, Valkyries was, on the contrary, pretty nervous. Although she quickly concealed her emotion right after everybody entered the room, Fei Yuan still sensed it. What was her relationship with Roland and what had made her react so weirdly? There could have been an intertwined, complicated romantic relationship between Roland and Valkyries. For example, the ardent love between the two, for some reason, turned into virulent rancor, or Valkyries had undergone a series of plastic surgeries and now sought revenge after 10 years had passed by, or Roland was regretted abandoning her and now wanted to be with her again. But Fei Yuan thought that this was highly unlikely. Valkyries was too good at controlling her facial expression. Had Fei Yuan discovered it at the beginning, she would have probably been fooled too. She did not think it was a simple love story. Fei Yuan had been observant as a kid. After she was awakened, this ability also sharpened accordingly. Because of this, she did not have many close friends, and people were sort of afraid of her. That was why she always looked so aloof and distant. She could know what others were thinking with just a glance. However, Roland was different. Fei Yuan could not see through this new hunter, nor could she figure out his relationship with Valkyries. Apparently, the two were hiding something, and she could not help finding out this secret. Her suspicion was further confirmed after she talked to Valkyries. This martialist from the Kargard Peninsula looked no different than ordinary people, but she had some strange behavior. If she had known Roland earlier, then it might explain her oddity. But after Fei Yuan dug a little deeper, she found something incredible. She had brought Valkyrie some food from her native town a few days ago, but the latter did not look particularly excited about that, although she had indeed eaten them all. However, this time, Valkyrie's attitude had completely changed. This indicated that Valkyries had not known what the food from her native town tasted like. She ate them simply because she was curious. What a horrible fact. It did not make sense that a person from the Kargard Peninsula had not eaten food from there. Also, Fei Yuan had never seen Valkyries play with her phone in the past 1 month. It was very strange that she never touched phones that so many young people were addicted to. As for those books, Valkyries requested for many history books from the library. Although reading was a good habit, Fei Yuan did not think she herself could read a book for a whole day without doing anything else. The change in Valkyrie's preference of food might be attributed to the lack of appetite. Being not so interested in phones might be ascribed to her quiet personality. History was probably one of her hobbies. However, there were just too many coincidences. Fei Yuan somehow had a feeling that Valkyries was familiarizing herself with this world. She would have probably dismissed this ridiculous assumption in the past. However, when she thought of the fact that Roland had been addressed Your Majesty, she suddenly had a bold idea. This idea terrified her, but she could not help thinking about it. Everything would make sense if she thought that way. Someone not belonging here had sneaked into this city. They were from the other world. Chapter 1287, Uneasiness. How many of them were there? What was their purpose? Were they awakened? What did the other world look like? Fei Yuan had no idea. From what she saw now, they were at least not enemies. Roland had indeed killed a lot of fallen evils and was truly fighting against the erosion. The joint mission last time provided the best example. She would never forget that someone had said, Your Majesty, everyone has been knocked out before she had lost her consciousness. She had obviously noticed that Roland was dodging her, which further confirmed her suspicion. In other words, if these people harbored ill designs, she would not have been still alive. Roland could have killed her after he had exterminated the magic creature and had the magic creature take all the blame. Nobody would have ever suspected his version of the story. Fei Yuan thus believed that Roland was helping this world. That was the reason that she did not report the incident to the association. Plus, she had no solid evidence at this point. Both Roland and Valkyries were concealing their real identities. Although she did not know why, she would like to put up a show with them and keep an eye on the two people. Just then, the telephone rang. "I see. Got it." Fei Yuan hung up the phone and nodded at Valkyries. She then said, "Mr. Rock asks me to do something for him. I have to go." "That's fine. I know it's important. See you tomorrow then. By the way." Valkyrie stopped Fei Yuan as the latter reached the doorstep. "Captain, could you bring some books regarding technologies to me tomorrow? Something like encyclopedia?" Fei Yuan said thoughtfully. "It shouldn't be a problem, but there are many types of them. I don't know whether I can find the one you like." "That's okay. Anything is fine with me," Valkyrie said pleasantly. "Thank you." "No worries." Fei Yuan's smile gave way to her normal cool look after she closed the door. Valkyries did not like history only. She was learning about this new world. Valkyrie sighed after Fei Yuan withdrew. She knew that she was a little too hasty, but she had no better choice. Fei Yuan was the only person who could help her understand this world. If she had taken things slow, she would have probably wasted a whole month in bed. If Hacksword's plan worked out well, the Western Front Army should have already stepped their foot onto Human's territory. Currently, he must be in a hot rage for her disappearance when he most needed people. To be honest, Valkyries had a complicated feeling at the moment. On one hand, she wished that Hacksword could wake her up at the Red Mist Pond with no regards to the possible consequence that she would lose most of her memories in the realm of mind and might even sustain severe head injuries. On the other hand, she still wanted to linger in this world a little longer. The reason was pretty simple. The further she probed into this world, the more unsettled she felt. It would be actually a relief if she forgot all about this. Whatever secret Roland was holding back from her, as long as she obtained the legacy shard in the real world, human beings would not be able to resist them anymore. What they possessed now would be eventually inherited by their kind, including his secret. The reason she wanted to stay here longer was that the Transformer, Heath Delis, had warned the clan that they would not reach the divine domain even if they won the Battle of Divine Will. Valkyries had engraved her mentor's last words upon her heart. If the victory could not perpetuate the clan, what should they do? Would the answer exist in this incredible realm of mind? Nevertheless, she had another hidden reason. She did not want to admit it, nor would she say it out loud. She felt as though she had traveled back in time to the old days when she had studied in the Cloud School. Every day she received new knowledge and saw a future complete different from the other world. Valkyries took out a box of desserts from the bag perched on the top of the books. The beautiful packaging of the visually appealing food was just like the food that men normally ate. Each color represented a specific flavor. As she unsealed the box, she could smell the delicious food. She had never had such tasty confections. Only inferior life forms in the clan, such as the inferior demons and the primal demons, ate with mouth. Normal food hardly provided energies and it was hard to digest. Therefore, usually they put the food in the Red Mist Pond to soften it. The process was pretty similar to baking, despite that they did not use fire like men. The processed food could only satisfy their biological need. After becoming an upgraded, she could directly obtain energies from the red mist, so Valkyries had not eaten for a very long time. Some clansmen thus associated eating with low lives, for example, human beings. Even witches needed to eat 3 meals a day. She had thought so too. However, now she realized that how amazing the food from the Kargard Peninsula was. Valkyries put a piece of cake into her mouth and savored the sweet taste. Without a doubt, these desserts still preserved the taste of the food processed in the red mist, but it was better after processed with humans' technologies. She soon finished up the desserts. Could the Cloud School and the Transformer make such great food? Valkyrie shook her head and put these thoughts behind. Anyway, the Battle of Divine Will had lasted for hundreds of years, and nothing could stop it. The current situation was beyond her control, and the most important task for the clan was to survive. Then, she was again back to the beginning. She knew why she felt so uneasy. After doing research for a month, Valkyries could pretty much ascertain that the great change in the human race had everything to do with this world, and Roland was the fundamental person who created these changes. The firearms in the history books were almost exactly the same as those in Ursruk's report. She had now finally located the last piece of the puzzle and found out why human beings had upgraded. Although she did not know how a male human accessed the realm of mind, he had indeed learned a lot from this world. Such extensive knowledge transcended the era she was living in, and he had applied these knowledge to the development of the human society. Witches served as a channel to convert the knowledge. They no longer fought on the battleground. What the clan was facing now was definitely not the Union 400 years ago but an entirely new human race. The truth was more than that. When she read these history books, she found another horrifying fact. When the human civilization reached a certain degree, their development would accelerate by leaps and bounds. Thousands of years ago, they had still been fighting with firearms. However, now, they had conquered the sky and the ocean, and their weapons could possibly destroy the whole world. That was why Valkyries felt disturbed. How far had Roland gone? Notwithstanding Heftali's warning, for the first time in her life, Valkyries became unsure whether her clan could defeat human beings. Chapter 1288, Intertwined Fate. Well, Mr. Roland, you'll be responsible for the third defensive line. Leave it to me. I'll do my best. After Roland bade farewell to Rock, he walked out of the defender's office and let out a sigh. Things did not go as well as he had anticipated. The Prism City had failed to trace down more fallen evils, and he himself had not found any further information about them either. The defender thus asked Roland to help tighten the security for the martialist contest. Since they could not locate any fallen evils at present, they had to change their plan and awaited fallen evils at the contest. To avoid unnecessary consumption of the martialist's strength, the executives of the association drafted a special schedule, and all the celebrity martialists should follow this schedule accordingly. In other words, the martialist contest this year would completely turn into a carefully designed trap. The competition thus became a sort of formality. The executives attached great importance to public safety and had actually had a private conversation with all the celebrity martialists in advance. Everybody understood that they were currently at a critical moment, so none of them looked disgruntled. There would be 4 defensive lines according to the plan. The government army and the association members disguised as audience constituted the first defensive line. Their main duty was to find out enemies and eliminate fallen evils acting alone. The second defensive line consisted of all the celebrity martialists, whether they were on stage or not. Traditional martialists would be responsible for the third defensive line and the defenders the last. The purpose of this arrangement was to ensure the success of the martialist contest before the appearance of a great number of fallen evils. As some fallen evils could manipulate martialists, it was not enough to only set up one defensive line. Roland, as a licensed hunter, was naturally assigned to the third defensive line. In fact, he would not only monitor any suspicious figures in the hall but also competing martialists. Although Roland felt a little regretful that they did not find the hiding places of the fallen evils, he currently had no better ways than waiting for them in ambush. The association definitely knew more about fallen evil than him. Fallen evils were not attracted to the force of nature only. They were controlled by the divine will, and their ultimate goal was to destroy the dream world and return magic power to the realm of mind. Therefore, the fallen evils should not miss such a perfect opportunity to collect so many cores. When Roland turned around at the corridor, a woman suddenly stopped in front of Roland. It was none other than the last person he wanted to see right now. She was the genius martialist, Fei Yuan. "Oh, it's you," Fei Yuan said while looking up at Roland. They were the only two people in the corridor, so Roland could not pretend that he had not seen her. He cleared his throat and managed a smile, then said, "Ahem, hello." His smile, however, soon faltered as Fei Yuan spoke on. "I have to thank you for saving me last time," Fei Yuan said while casually extending out her hand. "Thank you for killing that strange monster and saving all of us." Roland did not know what to say. After a moment, he said with some difficulties, You're welcome. But the association gave all the credit to me." Fei Yuan sighed. No, that's totally fine," Roland said while waving his hand. "Well, I have to conceal my identity out of some special reasons. I would rather few people notice my existence." "All right," Fei Yuan said, who, surprisingly, did not pursue this topic. "In that case, I'll take it." Roland wondered why Fei Yuan easily believed him. If she still remembered everything that had happened before passing out, she should have also remembered Ring's voice. It appeared that she deliberately chose to ignore that matter. Like all the rumors Roland had heard, Fei Yuan was never a careless person. Like many young geniuses, Fei Yuan was proud and strict, both with herself and others. She was always so distant and cold to people and was definitely not an easygoing martialist. However, the girl whom Roland was talking to now was completely the opposite of the martialist he knew. Suddenly, Fei Yuan seemed to remember something and asked, "By the way, do you think a person who likes to study history would also like science?" Stunned for a moment, Roland asked, "Why did you ask that? Do you remember that patient from the Kargard Peninsula?" Fei Yuan continued. "Miss Valkyries is now on my team. I thought she must feel very bored in the sanatorium, but she's actually interested in books. In the past 1 month, she almost read all the history books in the library." Roland was again surprised that Fei Yuan would care about someone else. He twitched his lips and was about to speak, when suddenly something flashed across his mind. Hang on, was not Valkyrie she mentioned the one who resembled the demon he had seen in the memory fragment? She had been reading history books in the past 1 month? All of them? Pretty much, especially war history. An interesting hobby, isn't it? Was it a coincidence? Roland revolved his mind quickly and immediately changed his words. "Yes, I believe she wants to read something about social study and humanity. Sorry, I have to take care of the task the defender entrusted to me and need to go now." Roland quickly decided to end this awkward conversation, and Fei Yuan seemed not to be offended. "Me too," she said while nodding. "See you then, Mr. Roland." "Ah, see you." After Fei Yuan left, Roland headed downstairs at once. He accelerated. Fei Yuan stopped and listened carefully to Roland's footsteps. This meeting was not a coincidence but a carefully planned meeting. If truth be told, Roland was the most difficult person she had ever dealt with. Unlike Valkyries, he behaved so naturally in this world. Had she not heard that Your Majesty, she would have probably never suspected him. She had noticed that during their last visit to the hospital, Roland had taken out his phone 3 times in 1 minute, and his eyes would linger on pretty ladies. His favorite pop seemed to be Coke, just like any ordinary man in this era. That was why Fei Yuan started to question about her theory of the other world. If Valkyries knew Roland, it meant that they came from the same world, but why did the two people act so differently? With these questions, Fei Yuan planned this meeting not only to thank Roland for his favor but also to test him. She was very astonished by the result. Roland seemed to have realized Valkyrie's strangeness after this conversation, but his reaction was so different from what she had predicted. She had thought Roland would have tried to cover for Valkyries since they were friends from the same world. But Roland was alarmed after hearing the news, and he was even more nervous than during the joint mission. Although Roland had tried to conceal his emotion, she still managed to capture the tiniest muscle movement around the corner of his eyes. Apparently, Roland was not that good at controlling his facial expression like Valkyrie's. She had learned a lot from this meeting. Fei Yuan decided to continue with her observation. She believed that the subsequent interaction between the two people would provide her with more information. A smile curled up Fei Yuan's lips as she knocked on the defender's office door. Roland immediately summoned Phyllis and Donnan after he returned to the apartment building. I need you to watch a demon. She may come from the memory fragment from this building.